And I said that, of course, it is photosynthesis, and that the plant needs carbon dioxide, it needs water, it needs sunlight and chlorophyll. And now there are some investigations that you have to know about the needs of the plant. But before we start anything, we have to destarch the plant. What's the meaning of destarching? It means that the plant has to be left for 24 hours in complete darkness in order to use up all the starch that it has made. Okay, and then we are going to leave it in the sunlight again. Now here, this is, destarching is a common step after doing any investigation about the needs of the plant. So let's start by the need for chlorophyll, or the effect of chlorophyll on the plant in photosynthesis. Now here, after destarching the plant, we have to expose the plant for a few days to sunlight again. And then the first step after exposure to sunlight, after destarching, is we have to boil the leaves of the plant. The leaf is boiled in water for about 2 minutes. Why do we have to boil the leaves? These questions frequently come in paper 6. Why do we have to boil the leaves? In order to damage the cell or to break down the cell wall, for breaking down the cell wall. So, of course, boiling does not only break down the cell wall, but it also denatures the enzymes, because we do not need the plant to make any photosynthesis after leaving it in the sunlight for a few days. And then, of course, when we boil the leaf, so the cell membrane of the leaf cells is going again to be damaged, or it will be permeable to everything, and this will allow the entry of ethanol. So we have, after this step, to add ethanol. So why do we want to add ethanol? Because the leaf is green in color, and we want to test for the formation of starch after leaving the plant for a few days in the sunlight. So ethanol is going to dissolve chlorophyll, because the green color of the leaf is going to hide the effect of iodine on the starch of the plant. So this will dissolve the chlorophyll. It means that I'm removing the green color of the plant. Afterwards, we have to wash by dipping in water again for a few seconds to wash the ethanol. And this dipping in water has nothing, any other function except to wash the ethanol. After that, of course, when we use the ethanol, the leaf becomes like somewhat dry. So we have to dip it in water, not just to wash the ethanol, and also to make the leaf soft, or to soften the leaf. The next step is that we place the leaf on a white tile, for example, and then we add iodine. Let me write this step here. Solution. So, of course, it's going to turn into blue-black. If it turned into blue-black, this means that this plant made photosynthesis and it stored starch in the leaf. That's why the leaf turned blue-black. If there is no starch, of course, so the leaf will remain yellowish-brown as the color of iodine. So this is the first investigation. The second investigation is for the effect of light on photosynthesis. Again, the first step, we have to destarch the plant, and after destarching it, we have to place like a piece of black paper on a leaf, like the question that you saw last time. or yesterday. If this is the leaf, so we have to put a black paper on part of the leaf in order to hide this part from sunlight. Now we have to place the whole plant later on for about 4 to 6 hours in the sunlight. In order to allow the rest of the leaf to make photosynthesis, and then after these hours we are going to remove this black paper and we are going to test for starch the same way as I explained before in the previous investigation. So if the results are positive, it means that the parts that received light, of course these are these parts, they received light, so they are going to show the color of iodine will change into blue-black, while the part that was covered will show a negative result, or it means that the iodine will stay yellowish-brown as it is. Here, this part will show a positive result. Now, what about the effect of carbon dioxide? So the third investigation is to investigate the effect of carbon dioxide on photosynthesis. Here we are going to get 2 potted plants and we distarch them. Starch 2 potted plants. And then we are going to put, let me add this picture instead of drawing. I hope I find the picture. Yes, here it is. So these are the 2 potted plants after distarching them. And then we put each plant under a bell jar. Okay, and we put a beaker here containing sodium hydrogen carbonate, and here a beaker containing sodium hydroxide. The question here comes, why do we add sodium hydrogen carbonate? Do you know why? Can you give me this answer, the answer to this question?
Because it has carbon in it.
Carbon?
That's my best guess.
Carbon dioxide, you mean? Because I couldn't hear you. It will provide the plant with
solution
carbon.
Does not have carbon.
Okay, but what is it going to do? Sodium hydroxide, what does it do? Or sometimes we call it the soda lime. Now, the soda lime, it absorbs carbon dioxide. Whenever you find soda lime, sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, sometimes they call it caustic soda. They absorb carbon dioxide. It means that any carbon dioxide produced of respiration of this plant is going to be absorbed by the sodium hydroxide, but this will provide carbon dioxide. It means that this one is going to act like a control. We do not supply the plant with carbon dioxide, and we see what's the effect of the absence of carbon dioxide on the plant. So we have to keep both potted plants or both apparatuses in the sunlight for a few hours, about 4 to 6 hours again, and we wait, of course, for the plants to perform photosynthesis and to produce starch. And then we are going to test for both plants for the presence of starch. Sure, in plant, this one is going to be positive with the test, and this one is going to be negative because there was no carbon dioxide, so it did not perform photosynthesis, no starch was made, and so the iodine test became negative, or the iodine stayed as yellowish brown as it was. But here the iodine, of course, is going to change into blue-black type. Let's go now to something else. It's about the limiting factors. But at the beginning, I have to explain what's the meaning of a limiting factor. The limiting factor, from its name, it is something in shortage, or that is little in amount, so that it affects a certain process of life. Yani, limiting factors are not only for photosynthesis, no, for any life process that depends on certain factors. The limiting factor is any factor in shortage. And for the plant, of course, this will affect the life process. So there are limiting factors for the plant. What are they? The first one is light intensity. The second one is the concentration of carbon dioxide. And the third factor is temperature. But why temperature? Because of the affection of the enzymes. So let me start by the light intensity as a limiting factor. If I put this curve, here it is, or let me add the other one, it's better. Just a second to remove this picture. So this one, light. Okay. So look at this curve. Of course, this is somewhat geometrical قوي. هو بيبقى like a curve like this. That's why I was looking for another picture. يبقى curved like this. Here, if I have 3 points, A, B, and C. As you can see here, طبعا the first thing that you have to do when you see a curve, you have to read what's written on the X and the Y axes, and then we follow the instructions on the curve, or the information on the curve. Here, this is the effect of the intensity of light with the rate of photosynthesis, and I want to ask you a question here. What is the dependent variable?
Rate of photosynthesis.
Very good. And the other one, of course, is independent. Yes, of course. The independent factor means that it's the factor that will change. And on its change, the dependent factor will rely. It means that here we have to keep something else in constant. It means that I'm working on carbon dioxide, on temperature, and on sunlight or intensity of light. So I have to keep the carbon dioxide and temperature constant. But this, of course, here in such an investigation, it relies on what is the limiting factor. Is it carbon dioxide or light or temperature? So here, as the light increases, we can see on the curve that there is steepness, and then from A to B, it means that light here is the limiting factor from A to B, because if we decrease light, so the rate of photosynthesis will decrease. If we increase light, so the rate will increase, until we come to a certain point where the curve levels off. Although the light is increasing, but the curve levels off, it means that the rate of photosynthesis is not increasing anymore. The light is present in plenty. What about what led to this leveling off? It means that there must be another factor that limited the rate of photosynthesis. And here, these factors, of course, are either carbon dioxide or temperature. But what about if I changed the independent variable to be carbon dioxide? Again, the same curve is going to be produced. Here it is. So here, as you can see, that from A to B, carbon dioxide is the limiting factor, and from B to C, another factor is limiting, and this can be light intensity or temperature. But this is not true for temperature if I want to investigate whether it is a limiting factor or not. Why? Because in temperature, it is something different. It depends on enzymes. That's why here in temperature, you can see that when the temperature increases, so the rate of the chemical reaction increases because the enzymes are working more actively until we reach the optimum temperature where the enzyme reaches its maximum activity. And then if I increase the temperature, the activity is going to drop. Here, as you can see, that the temperature itself is the limiting factor. When it decreases, the activity will decrease. When it increases, again, the activity will decrease because the enzymes are going to be denatured. For light and carbon dioxide, we say that either one of the other factors is the limiting factor. But for temperature, no. Temperature itself is the limiting factor without any interference with any other factor in its effect on the enzyme of photosynthesis. Now, because of these limiting factors, the growers of plants, they relied on these limiting factors in producing the greenhouses. And they call it the greenhouse system. Here they use these greenhouse systems in order to increase the yield of the crop. And of course, the farmers, they can control the limiting factors in these greenhouses. Like what, for example? Like they have to provide an enriched environment with carbon dioxide, and here they have to burn, for example, like paraffin or whatever, it is burned in order to increase the concentration of carbon dioxide about 3 times the original amount, and this will double the yield of the crop, of course. Also, they have to control the temperature. They have to provide the optimum temperature for carbon, for the plants, of course, for the enzymes of the plants, and this is done thermostatically by heaters. How they use thermostatically controlled heaters. This is much better than burning something. They use these controlled heaters to make the temperature correct or right for the enzymes to work. The third thing that they have to control is the intensity, of course, of light. It must not be very high, must not be very low, or sometimes we call it the optimum light. Here the light has a certain intensity for photosynthesis. Of course, it has to be high, but not very high. And the light, it must have the correct intensity and, of course, the correct wavelength. The correct wavelength here is the red and blue, but not the green. Because the plant or the chlorophyll can absorb the wavelengths of light between 400 nanometers and 700 nanometers. فال 400 تقريبا is around the blue and the 700 is around the red. The green is in between. If they gave the plant a green wavelength, a green color light wavelength, so the plant will miss this. It's in between. يعني الgreen is about 500. You don't have to know these numbers, of course. This is about 420 تقريبا. It's better to give the plant all the range of wavelengths from blue to red, not from green to red. Of course, they have to provide light for a certain duration, and this is controlled, of course, by this will control the product of the crop yield. So let's go to now to where does photosynthesis happen? And of course, it happens in the leaf. So let me put a gross structure of the leaf and then microscopic structure. Gross structure, of course, it means that how the leaf look like from outside, grossly. And as you can see, if this is the stem here, so the leaf is attached to the stem by the petiole. Sometimes we call it the stalk or petiole because the words are hazy. And then the material of the rib itself is called the blade. This blade is horizontal, must be horizontal in order to absorb as much sunlight as possible, and it has to be flat again to absorb as much sunlight as possible and to absorb carbon dioxide as much as possible. This stalk or petiole, it continues through the leaf by forming the midrib. It's not very clear, midrib. And from this midrib, there are branches like this or a network of veins. Sometimes we call this the venation or the network of veins that run throughout the whole width of the blade. But what about the internal structure or the microscopic structure of the leaf? Of course, this is a hand-drawn picture, but it shows the parts of the leaf. Here, I would like to mention something, that the leaf has an upper surface and a lower surface. So if I took a transverse section in the leaf, for example, if this is the leaf, this is the upper surface, of course, and I cut the leaf like this, and I took this part and looked under the microscope. I'm going to see the picture in front of you. Here is the upper surface, and here is the lower surface. The upper surface is formed of barrel-shaped cells and only one layer, and also the lower surface. Both the upper surface and the lower surface, the cells are called the epidermal cells. And we call the upper surface the upper epidermis, and here the lower epidermis. The difference between the upper and the lower epidermis are two things. The first thing is the waxy layer that's covering the upper epidermis. It is called the cuticle. Yes, there is cuticle on the lower epidermis, but it's thinner than on the upper. ففي الupper epidermis, the cuticle is thicker, while in the lower it is thinner. طب why? Because the thicker, this cuticle, as you can see, it's a waxy layer. It's a protective layer. It protects the inside of the leaf from the very strong sun heat. The waxy layer, it looks shiny. It acts like a mirror to reflect back the heat of the sun. Of course, we need heat, but not as strong as the heat coming from the sun. In the lower epidermis, it is thinner because it's not exposed to the sunlight like the upper epidermis. Again, here I have to mention a very important information about the upper and lower epidermis, that the cells are transparent. And this means that they do not contain chlorophyll. Why? Can you answer me why? They are transparent.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Excuse me?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Okay, they are transparent in order to allow the sunlight to pass through, to reach the cells inside. The epidermal cells, these are questions, exam questions, by the way. They are transparent, or they do not contain chlorophyll in order to allow the sunlight to pass through the cells. If they contain chlorophyll, they're going to be opaque. The sunlight will not be able to pass. Now, next here, in between the upper and lower epidermis, we have the cells that are responsible for photosynthesis. This layer is called the mesophyll, or we call it the mesophyll tissue. The mesophyll tissue is formed of two parts, the palisade mesophyll and the spongy mesophyll. Sometimes we call it the palisade layer and the spongy layer. Both of them, they contain chlorophyll, but the palisade contains more chlorophyll. And again here, why? The palisade layer,
Spongy
yes,
is not exposed to light as much.
very good, because it is nearer to the sun as well, like this. Of course, the leaf is very, very thin, but we have layers, and one of them is nearer to the sun than the other, and that's why it has to absorb as much sunlight as possible. Type. Spongy layer, yes, they have chloroplasts, they have chlorophyll, but much less than the palisade layer, and they have a more important function. Look at these air spaces that are found in between the spongy layers. These air spaces are very important for two reasons. The first reason, for the exchange of gases, for the accumulation of gases here in these air spaces, and they are important in transpiration, which I'm going to explain later on. Here from the stomata, as you can see here, there are holes, the stomata. From the stomata, the carbon dioxide enters from the air, like this. And then carbon dioxide is going to accumulate in the air spaces. Then it will diffuse to the inside of the cells. And of course, in every part of the leaf, there are air spaces that will gather the carbon dioxide and will allow it to diffuse later. After photosynthesis, oxygen is produced, so oxygen is going to gather in the air spaces and then they get out. So this is what's meant by the exchange of gases that happen in the air spaces. Now, of course, there is a very important part that is not found here, and I'm going to draw it, which are the vascular bundles. Vascular bundles means the xylem and phloem. So where are they in the leaf? They are found in the material of the midrib, and the xylem is towards the lower epidermis, and the phloem is towards the upper epidermis. Sometimes they get you a picture and they ask you to label. So this is the phloem and this is the xylem. The position of the xylem and the phloem is important because in the exam they often get you a stem, a leaf, a root, and they ask you to point at the xylem or the phloem. Let's go now to these stomata. Stomata are just holes in the in both the upper and the lower epidermis, but they are too much in the lower epidermis than the upper one. When we even when we draw any transverse section or TS in a leaf, we never draw the stomata on the upper epidermis, but we draw them on the lower epidermis. What are stomata? Stomata are just holes to allow entry or the exit of gases, and also to allow the exit of water vapor of transpiration. Of course, transpiration is the exit or the getting out of the water as water vapor from the stomata. These stomata, they have to be more in number on the lower surface in order, again, to be away from the sunlight, from the sun heat, because of يعني controlling the amount of water vapor getting out. The sunlight is here and its heat is entering or penetrating through the leaf, so it's going to evaporate the water found in the cells. If the stomata are too much on top or on the upper epidermis, so this will allow more and more evaporation of water vapor, so the leaf is going to dry up. That's why the stomata are much more on the lower surface to protect the leaf from drying up by the effect of the sun heat. The lower epidermis is away from the sun heat than the upper epidermis. But let's have a look at this stomata and what it is composed of. Here, as you can see, this is a true picture. These are the cells, the epidermal cells, and this is a stomata. And as you can see that it's formed of two parts and a hole in between. This hole is the stomatal hole, this one. Stomatal hole. And it is surrounded by guard cells. So here are the guard cells. This is the stoma, singular of course, and here it is opened and here it is closed. The guard cells are responsible for the opening and closure of the stomata. But when does the stoma close and when does it open? It opens during the day to allow, of course, carbon dioxide to enter and oxygen to exit, and also to allow the exit of water vapor. And it closes during the night in order to preserve the amount of water inside the leaves. Sometimes the weather is very hot, so water vapor may get out or may escape from these stomata. That's why the stomata have to be closed at night in order to protect or to preserve the amount of water inside the leaf. The guard cells are normal plant cells. As you can see that here it contains, or it has a cell wall. And again, the cell membrane, you cannot see it because it is sticking to the cell wall. It has cytoplasm, and these green dots are the chloroplasts. It has a vacuole, it has a nucleus. It is a normal plant cell. Now let's go to the vascular bundles, or the xylem and phloem. Let me begin by the xylem. These are called vascular bundles because it's not only one xylem vessel, no, it's a lot of them making a bundle. And also the phloem, a lot of them, phloem vessels, make a bundle together. Now, if I want to describe what is the xylem, if I drew it like this, for example, and here I have to draw these rings, the xylem, that surround the xylem, made of lignin, of course. So if I want to describe what is the xylem, I have to say that the xylem is a hollow vessel, and I have to mention the direction of water and minerals transported. I will say that it is unidirectional. So what's the direction of water and minerals? It's from below upward, or from the xylem of the root, from the soil upward towards the leaf. So we say that the xylem vessel is a unidirectional vessel that will transmit or transfer or transport water and dissolved minerals. Walls of the xylem, of course, because they are very, very weak, so they are lignified. So they are supported by this solid material, which is called lignin. طب why the xylem is weak without lignin? Because at the beginning of formation of the plant, after germination, of course, and the plant is still young, the xylem vessels were normal cells like all the other cells, containing a nucleus, a vacuole, cytoplasm, and everything in all the cells. And there is a cell membrane and a cell wall in between the cells. But because these cells are going to be a xylem, so everything here was lost. Everything inside the cell is lost together with the cross-section between the cells and everything, leaving us with only a hollow vessel. Because there is nothing inside the cell, the cells of the xylem, this will make the xylem very weak. That's why it has to be lignified, or it has to be provided with a building up of lignin, which is a solidified material and also waterproof. This is very important because it does not allow any water to get out of the xylem vessels in order to preserve all the amount of water to the leaves. The water is going to move up the xylem due to two things, due to transpiration and osmosis. And I'm going to show you now what's the connection between transpiration and osmosis with the xylem when I explain the transpiration. Now let's go to the other vascular bundle, which is the phloem. Here the phloem, it does not translocate materials in one direction only. No, it is bidirectional, or sometimes we call it multi-directional. But let me call it bidirectional. Now, what does this mean? It means that this phloem, as you know, of course, it carries the food of the plant, and there are two substances that are carried by the phloem, which are sucrose and amino acids, of course. They can dissolve in water to be carried by this phloem to every part of the plant. Why do I say bidirectional? Because suppose this is the stem and this is the leaf, and the food is done in the leaf, so the xylem will take the food of the leaf, the phloem, I'm sorry, in all directions, in order to supply every part of the plant, whether above the leaf level or below the leaf level, by food. Now, what are the components of the xylem? Here, again, at the beginning, the xylem was a normal cells arranged one above the other like this. This is the partition or the transverse section between the cells. And the cell, of course, it has a vacuole, it has a nucleus, has cytoplasm, organelles, whatever, like all the cells. But when the plant develops, and this part is going to be a phloem, so the nucleus, the vacuole, most of the organelles will be lost. The only organelles that are left are the mitochondria. Why the mitochondria remained? Because the function of what the phloem is doing, translocation of the food through the phloem, it needs energy. That's why the mitochondria are still there. Also, the cytoplasm remains, because it is the cytoplasm that's going to carry the sucrose and amino acids. This is the first modification that happened, or the first differentiation that happens in the wall, in the cells forming the phloem. The other modification is that the transverse walls, they are going to show holes, to allow them to look like a sieve. That's why we call this the sieve plate, and this part is called the sieve element. Now, because there is no nucleus, there is nothing except the mitochondria and cytoplasm, what is going to help the translocation of the sucrose and amino acids from the leaf to the phloem? Beside each sieve element, there is a companion cell. This companion cell is a normal cell with all its organelles, with everything inside, complete cell. This companion cell is going to help. Companion cell is going to help the translocation of the food of the plant from the leaf to the phloem inside the stem. Of course, when the leaves, they make photosynthesis and they produce the food of the plant, we say that the leaf is the source of sucrose and amino acids, or the source of food. And when the phloem takes this food, whether upwards or downwards, so this food is going to reach a certain destiny that we call a sink. The sink is where the food is stored. So if the phloem took the sucrose, for example, so from the source, it's going to reach the sink to be stored as starch. So whenever the plant needs extra glucose, this starch is going to change back to glucose in order to provide the plant with the extra glucose it needs. Here, how can the companion cell help in the translocation of food from the source to the phloem, or to the sieve elements? The companion cells, as I told you, it is a complete cell. So it takes, suppose this is the companion cell, like this, and here is the sieve tube, or the sieve element. And here is the cell of the leaf that produces glucose or the sucrose. So here is a palisade cell, because it's the cell that performs photosynthesis. So glucose is found here. So it's going to change into sucrose, and it passes through the companion cell, and this is, by the way, by active transport. It is an active process. It needs energy. That's why the companion cell is a complete cell, and its mitochondria, of course, this is an active cell, so it has a lot of mitochondria that will provide energy for the passage or for the active transport of sucrose. So the companion cells, they load with sucrose, and then they unload the sucrose in the phloem, or in, let me call it, into the sieve element, because it's a part of the phloem. All this is the phloem together with the companion cell. After the unloading of the sucrose into the sieve elements, we are going to see that water is going to follow this high solute in the phloem by osmosis. Where does the water come from? Don't forget ever that we have as well xylem vessels here. and they contain water. So water is going to get out through, let me erase this. There are certain very narrow, let me say, holes. When you go to AS, you're going to see that they are not holes, but I have to say holes now. These are called the pits. So water is going to get out of these pits, of course, from higher water potential to low water potential in the cytoplasm here. So it has to follow the loading of sucrose. For when sucrose is loaded in the sieve element, water is going to follow by osmosis, and they form together what is known as the phloem sap. So the phloem sap is made of two components, water together with sucrose. So this phloem sap is nothing but a kind of solution in which the water dissolved the sucrose, because we know that sucrose is one of the sugars or disaccharides that can dissolve in water, and that's why they form together what's known as the phloem sap. Now here, this phloem sap is going to move whether in this direction or in the other direction in order to be to reach the sink where it is stored, the sucrose is stored. The phloem still contains small amounts of cytoplasm along the wall like this. As I told you before, the cytoplasm remains along the wall here. Suppose this is the sieve plate, and this is another sieve plate, like this. Here are holes. The cytoplasm is found along the walls of the phloem, or the sieve element, in order to move and to carry with it the sucrose and water, or to carry the phloem sap. This movement of the cytoplasm is called cytoplasmic streaming, where it carries the food from one sieve element to another. Suppose this is a sieve element, and here is the sieve plate, another sieve element, and here is the sieve plate. Here are the holes. So the cytoplasm is going to move like this through the holes, moving from one sieve element to another, carrying with it the sucrose until they unload it in the sink, and then the cytoplasm returns back free to carry more and more sucrose back again. The phloem, as I just said, that it has this little amount of cytoplasm along the walls, together with the mitochondria that are still there. So these mitochondria will provide an amount of energy to the cytoplasm to allow it to move. Yet as the energy that is brought from the, or that is derived or taken from the companion cell, this energy is used for the active transport of the sucrose till it reaches the sieve element. But the movement of the cytoplasm is due to the energy produced by the mitochondria. Yani there's a difference between the energy here in the sieve elements or in the companion cells. In companion cells, the energy is derived from its mitochondria, while inside the sieve elements, the energy is derived from the mitochondria that were left when the phloem was made. Do you have any question about this part, Salman?
No.
It seems that you're tired today. I can feel it from your voice.
To be honest, I am, but it's fine. I'm paying attention.
Okay. طب let's go to يعني does the plant need only water? No, of course it needs minerals as well. What are the minerals or the main minerals that are needed by the plant? The main minerals are nitrogen, of course, nitrogen salts, magnesium, and calcium. These are the main elements that are needed by the plant. Now, what about nitrogen and why is it needed? Nitrogen, of course, it is needed to form amino acids. طب why بقى? The plant makes photosynthesis, so it forms glucose. Part of this glucose will change to amino acids when the plant takes in or absorbs nitrates or nitrites. Okay, these are the salts of nitrogen, of course. When the plant gets the nitrates or the nitrites or the nitrogen salts, the plant can make amino acids. In the plant, these amino acids, they are bound together to form proteins. So the proteins are needed for growth of the plant, of course. If there is deficient or a little amount of nitrogen or nitrates and nitrites, so the plant is going to be stunted, or in other words, it's going to be like a dwarf. It's not going to grow normally. The growth is going to be very slowly, and the bottom of the leaves are dead and the roots are slightly affected, of course, by the deficient nitrogen. But what about magnesium? The plant needs magnesium in order to make chlorophyll, because chlorophyll molecule contains magnesium, and by the way, the magnesium is the main element that traps the sunlight by chlorophyll. So if there is deficiency of magnesium, so the plant, of course, the leaves will be yellow, and the plant will not grow properly, will not perform photosynthesis. What about the calcium? Calcium, again, is needed for growth of the plant. If there is deficient calcium, this means that the plant is going to be out to grow very, very slowly. If the soil is deficient in such compounds or such minerals, we have to provide them by giving, for example, fertilizers. Fertilizers, they mainly contain nitrogen. That's why we call them the nitrogen fertilizers. Here, these nitrogenous fertilizers, they provide nitrogen in the form of nitrate ions and nitrates and nitrites, or they provide ammonium ions, positive ammonium ions. So all these, they contain nitrogen, but using fertilizers can lead to a bad effect, which is called eutrophication. Eutrophication. Now, what is this eutrophication? Eutrophication means the pollution of water by nitrogenous compounds. Now, why? Suppose this is a field, for example, and this is a draining canal. Whenever you find a field, there must be a draining canal that pours its water in a river. The draining canal receives the extra water after irrigation or after rainfall or whatever. If I have plants here and they added fertilizers on the soil, so if there is rainfall after spraying these fertilizers, if there is rainfall after spraying the fertilizers, or if they irrigated the plant after spraying the fertilizers. So water is going to take away the fertilizers and throw them in this draining canal. This is called leaching of fertilizers. So these fertilizers are very good for the growth of the plant, yes. But if they reached the water surface or a river or a canal or whatever, we have in the bottom here plants as well. So these plants are going to flourish, they are going to grow too much, consuming in the respiration all the oxygen that is dissolved in water. So this means that they, after consuming all the oxygen, they are going to die. They will not be enough oxygen because the water plants are growing too much and very fast. So the death of not only the plants and the animals found in water, they are going to die, and this will pollute the water, which leads to something called eutrophication. In order to use fertilizers, they have to irrigate the plant and then use the fertilizers. But what about the rainfall? Of course, the farmers, they know about the broadcast and things like that. They know when the rain is going to fall. So they wait till the rain falls and then they spray their fertilizers. Of course, sometimes the rain falls in unpredicted or unexpected time, but they have nothing to do with this. By now I finished this chapter. Let's go to the other chapter, which is about human nutrition. At the beginning, we have to begin with the diet, and we have to know what's meant by a balanced diet. A balanced diet is the diet that contains the key nutrients in the right amounts. This is a balanced diet. But what are the key nutrients? The key nutrients are carbohydrates, they are fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and above all, of course, water. So if we ingested or we took this diet in the right amounts, these key nutrients in the right amounts, so we say that our diet is balanced. If the diet is unbalanced, it means that there is either there is a lack of one of the nutrients or more than one, or we intake one of the key nutrients in great amounts on expense of the others. This is the unbalanced diet, and we are going to suffer something called malnutrition. Malnutrition means bad nutrition. If we do not include key nutrients in our diet, or we increase one of the key nutrients on the expense of another. How much do we eat? This is not the same for all individuals. So the intake of our diet is related to certain factors, and these factors are the age, sex, and activity. So according to the age, the children below 12 years, for example, they need more proteins for growth, of course, and they need more calcium for building up the bones and teeth. Of course, they need iron as well, but these are the most important factors that they have to use more than any other age. What about the sex? let me continue this age. Age of 12, it means that they will be teenagers. Now, teenagers, they have, of course, to include what we call the high calorie intake diet. The high calorific diet, it means that they have to eat carbohydrates, they have to eat fats, of course, in considerable amounts, not to increase too much so they become obese later on. And they have to include proteins as well in their diet. What if they became adults? Let me erase this. Adults. Here in adulthood, the balanced meal must be with less calories than in teenagers. So, but if there are certain circumstances, for example, these are according to age. What if about the sex? Always for the male, they generally require more energy. That's why they have to eat more calories in their diet. And of course, because of their muscular build, they have to include more proteins in their diet. Now, what about females? Females, during the reproductive period, they must take, during the menstruation period, they must increase food containing iron in order to replace the blood that is lost from these females. If the female is pregnant, of course, she is has to consider the presence of a growing fetus inside her uterus, so she must take more iron, more calcium, and more folic acid. So what if the person is active or an athlete or somebody that's regularly exercising? So they must include, of course, high calorific diet of food in their diet, and they must include proteins, where for sure by addition of vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals are found in nearly all the food that we take. Fruits and vegetables, in meat, in poultry in general, in all kinds of meat, in fish and whatever. They have vitamins and minerals in their bodies. And of course, water, by drinking water or juices or whatever are the drinks. Also, fruits and vegetables, they contain a very high amount of water. Now, what if somebody is not eating balanced diet? So this will result in what we call malnutrition. As I just said, mal means bad. Bad nutrition or the malnutrition is a condition caused by eating an unbalanced diet type. Is the malnutrition only about something that something is deficient in our diet? No. Malnutrition means overeating or undereating. So we can, if we are overeating, we have overnutrition, and this is not good. Overnutrition means that the balanced diet, we eat the balanced diet, but eating too much, for example, carbohydrates, eating too much fat. This is going to result in something called the overnutrition, and of course, this will lead to overweight, which is not good at all. And if the condition was aggravated, this will lead to obesity with all its complications. Now, what about the other form of malnutrition? It is undernutrition. Undernutrition here, it means that either we are having too little food or we eat food in incorrect proportions, or we do not eat some of our key nutrients, and this will result in underweight. The best kind of food must be balanced according to the amount of the kinds of the key nutrients, and there must be a balanced energy inside our body. Means that the energy intake must be equal to our input. Let me call it input, must be equal to the energy output. It means that we have to eat food proportional with the energy that we need, or proportional with the effort that we exert. Not to eat too much. Energy input is more than the energy output. This will lead to overweight and obesity. And if the opposite, energy input is less than the energy output, this will lead to underweight as well. For the best food must be balanced, and the energy input must be equal to the energy output. Now, what if malnutrition happened? What are the effects of this malnutrition? Malnutrition can result in several disorders, like, for example, a condition called kwashiorkor. Here, the amount of carbohydrates are eaten more than the amount of proteins. There is another condition called marasmus. Here, the child is not eating anything. Yani, yes, they are eating a little amount of carbohydrates, but no proteins at all. So they result in something like the child looks like an old man, and nearly as if they do not have any flesh, just skin that covers bones. They look like this. There is another condition which is called starvation. Starvation, here, the person loses strength and finally dies because of the lack of food. And this marasmus, by the way, it leads to death, both of them. Are there any bad effects because of malnutrition? Here, for example, these three conditions are due to lack of food or lack of some kind of the key nutrients. But there are other generalized effects for malnutrition. Yani, as I just said, that malnutrition can be overnutrition. What I just mentioned is about undernutrition. But what about overnutrition, or having one kind of material in excess in our bodies? This will affect parts of the body, like the heart, for example. This will lead to what we know as CHD, or coronary heart diseases. The coronary heart diseases usually result from eating too much fat, which are rich in saturated fatty acids and cholesterol, and this will lead to heart attacks, of course. The other condition, obesity, with all its complications. Obesity starts by overeating, then overweight, then obesity. Obesity is eating too much fats and carbohydrates, and this leads to storage of these materials in the body in the form of fats. Yani, when we eat more and more carbohydrates, more than our needs, the excess carbohydrates are going to change into fats in our bodies to be stored there. With these persons, they eat too much fat and too much carbohydrates, so all these materials in excess are going to be stored as fat in their bodies that will add to their weight, of course. Now, what are the bad effects of obesity? Again, coronary heart diseases. Also, they might lead to, if the fats deposited in the blood vessels of the brain, this will lead to a stroke. Also, they will always have painful joints because their joints cannot carry these very heavy weights. Also, this will lead to high blood pressure. Also, obesity might lead to diabetes. And there is a very important psychic effect which is low self-esteem. They are always feeling that everybody's mocking at them, everybody's laughing because of their size and so on. So they become depressed and they have a very low self-esteem. Now, what about the nutrients and their uses? So let me begin, for example, by carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, they are, never write carbs in the test, by the way. They provide energy. They are sources of energy. What about fats? Again, they are sources of energy, and the amount of energy they produce is much higher than the carbohydrates. But the body always, as I told you before, that it searches for the easiest way to extract the energy. This comes from glucose, which is a kind of carbohydrate. The fat is much more complicated. So when the carbohydrates are unavailable in the body starts to rely in extracting energy from fats, but this needs too much effort from the body. Again, the fats, they are very rich source of energy for humans and for other organisms. Also, they are used in insulation. So what does this mean? For example, if I have here the skin, surface of the skin, this is the skin. Just below this skin, there are cells that store fat. They are called, they form a tissue called the adipose tissue. If this is the air, for example, and it is very cold. So from physics, we know that, and here inside the body, it is warm. From physics, we know that, that the heat travels from high temperature to low temperature. It is supposed that the heat leaves the body to the air because inside the body is warmer than outside in the air. But the presence of this adipose tissue prevents this escape of heat in order to keep the temperature of the body constant. So that's why we say that the fats, they act as an insulating material just under the skin. Also, in some organisms, the fats, they help flotation of these organisms, like, for example, the blubber that is found in the whale. It helps its flotation when it swims in water because the whale is very, very heavy. So it has to float in order to at least to inhale oxygen or to inhale air. So this blubber, which is a great area of fat under the skin of the whale, it helps it to float on top of water, which is called buoyancy. Buoyancy. Now, also, there are some of the hormones that are fat in nature. To be more accurate, the sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, they are steroid. We call them the steroids because they are, their nature is made of fat. Now, proteins. What are the uses of proteins? Of course, for growth, for building and repairing the damaged tissues. Proteins form the enzymes. Proteins form antibodies. Proteins form hormones. Yani most of the proteins of the hormones are protein in nature. Only a few of them are lipid in nature. Proteins form the muscles, the hair, the ligaments, tendons, parts of the bones. Yani proteins are needed in several needs inside our bodies. So, what about the vitamins and minerals? Let's go now to the vitamins. For example, vitamin C. Vitamin C, it is used to build up the connective tissue, which is the tissue that connects between the parts of the body. Also, it is very important to protect the cell from aging. Protects from aging of the cells. Also, vitamin C strengthens the blood vessels. So if there is lack of vitamin C, the gums bleed and things like that. What about vitamin D? Of course, you have to know the sources of vitamin C, vitamin D. I'm just giving you a quick revision about these, but the details, of course, I know that you know them. Vitamin D, its main function is that it helps absorption of calcium.
Sunlight, no?
Excuse me?
Absorption of calcium?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So what is calcium needed for?
The bones.
Of course, but never forget, we say always bones and teeth, especially for, not only for young children, even for the adults. They have to include calcium in their diet to strengthen their teeth, or else they are going to be loose and they are going to be, what you call them, fragile, and they can break. The teeth can break. Which mineral now? Let's go to iron. Iron, of course, it is used in making hemoglobin. And its deficiency is going to lead to anemia, as we know. Deficiency of calcium and vitamin D will lead to a condition called rickets. Deficiency of vitamin C will lead to scurvy, which is bleeding gums together with the pain in the joints. Okay, rickets means that the bones are curved. Anemia, of course, this will lead to that the person always feels tired and cannot concentrate and things like that. Now, what about the importance of fiber in our food? And at the beginning, what is fiber? Fiber is the cellulose that is found in the cell wall of the plant cells. So we can digest the plant cells, but not the cellulose. Why? Because our bodies do not contain the cellulase enzyme. That's why the cellulose is going to change into fiber in our intestine, and these are going to move to the large intestine to be very important. The presence of fiber in the large intestine is very healthy because they help the large intestine to move, and also they provide a bulk for feces. When they allow or they push the large intestine to move by peristalsis, this is going to push the feces through the normal pathway to get out of the anus. If somebody is not eating fruits and vegetables in good amounts, so they will suffer, of course, constipation. And the lack of fiber, this will lead to constipation, and this is not good because it leads to other complications, not just that they are hard feces. So what about water? Why is it important? Because all the chemical reactions that happen in our cells, they depend on the presence of water. All the metabolic reactions, they depend on the presence of water. Enzymes cannot work except in the presence of water. And of course, water, it acts as a transporting medium. Why? Because it forms blood. And blood is a transporting medium in our bodies for whether for animals or for humans, of course. What else? Let's go now to digestion now. And let me begin by the digestive system. Digestive system is the system, of course, that deals with what we intake or what we ingest. The dealing of the digestive system with what we ingest, of course, is called digestion. And this digestion has two ways, either mechanical or chemical. Now, the digestive system, it consists of two parts, the digestive canal or we call it the alimentary canal, and the alimentary canal associates or associating glands. These glands are three: the salivary glands, liver, and pancreas. So why do we need such glands? Because the three of them, they produce secretions that help digestion of food. About the alimentary canal or the digestive canal, it's a very long canal that is about 10 meters long in an adult, of course, and through this canal, several chemical reactions happen in order to digest the food. Right. Let me begin by the first act that we do, which is ingestion. The word in means to get inside the alimentary canal. This means taking substances like food or drinks into the body through the mouth. After the food passes through the digestive canal, so the undigested food gets out of the body by egestion. Egestion means the exit of the undigested food. So the egestion is passing out of the undigested food as feces through the anus, and we have to differentiate between egestion and excretion. Excretion means that the waste materials of metabolism have to cross a cell membrane. But here in egestion, no, feces does not cross the cell membrane. It just moves in the large intestine, which is a tube like this, and then feces gets out of the body. But if I have a cell in which metabolism is performed or metabolic reactions happen, so the wastes of these metabolism have to cross the cell membrane, and this means excretion. But there's a difference between both, is that egestion is without passing the cell membrane because the undigested food is moving through a tubal form intestine, while excretion, the waste materials have to cross a cell membrane. What happens afterwards? What are the parts of the alimentary canal and its associatives? Let me begin by the mouth. In the mouth, there are three things. There are teeth, there is a tongue, and there is saliva. Sometimes when I ask the students what's the function of the tongue, they say tasting food. No, its function concerning digestion. The tongue is important because when we are chewing the food, it is moving inside the mouth, leading to mixing of the food with saliva. The movements of the tongue inside the mouth leads to mixing of the food with saliva. Where does this saliva come from? It comes from salivary glands. And we have three pairs of salivary glands, and this is the first associating gland. We have three pairs, and they produce saliva. But what is saliva? Saliva, as we call it, that it is one of the digestive juices. A digestive juice. That contains, because it's a juice or a secretion, it mainly contains water, and it contains some minerals. Also, it contains mucus, and it contains amylase enzyme. Let me get this toolbar. You cannot see it, I can see it. Amylase enzyme. This amylase enzyme is responsible for changing starch into sugar, and this sugar is maltose. So this is the function of the saliva, is to change starch into sugar maltose. So where does the starch come from? From anything starchy that we eat, like bread, potatoes, pasta, whatever. So, when we chew the food, the tongue is moving inside the body to mix the food with this saliva in order to begin the digestion of any kind of food that contains starch. So if you are eating a sandwich, for example, of whatever, a kind of meat, for example, so in the mouth, the bread is only affected, but not the meat. Whatever you eat and you are chewing the food, the only part of food that's affected by saliva is the food that contains starch. So the tongue, it mixes the food with this saliva. And of course, the teeth are chewing, or in other words, grinding the food. In order to, it has a very important reason. Grinding food is going to change the food particles, large food particles, into smaller ones according to their size. If I have a large piece of food, if you took a bite from whatever you are eating, so it's considered large, even if the bite is small, but it is considered a large piece. If the amylase enzyme going to work, it's going to work on the outer surface only. But because we are chewing, so we are changing these large food particles into smaller ones. So we are increasing the surface area, so the enzyme can work on every part from the depths of our food, not only the surface. So we say that chewing will increase the surface area for the action of the enzymes. Whenever there is any kind of changing in size, it means that we are increasing the surface area for the action of enzymes. Right. Next, we have, here is the mouth, of course. Next, we have, let me get the folder, just a second. Oops. Yes, here it is. Look at this. So here in the mouth, I just said, mentioned something about the saliva. These are the salivary glands. So the food is going to be swallowed to reach the esophagus. In the esophagus, what is the esophagus? At the beginning, we say that it is a muscular organ that looks like a tube. Its length is about 25 centimeters, and it moves the food by peristalsis. So what is peristalsis? We say that it's a series of contractions and relaxation of the muscles of the esophagus in order to push the food bolus to reach the stomach. Now, in the stomach, here it is, of course. If I drew the stomach like this, or the end of the esophagus, and here is the stomach, and here is the end of the stomach. At the beginning of the stomach, at its junction with the esophagus, there is a muscular sphincter, which is like a circular muscles that are surrounding the end of the esophagus. And this sphincter is always closed except when food reaches here. When the food reaches the end of the esophagus, this sphincter is going to open, allowing the food to the inside of the stomach. At the end of the stomach, there is another sphincter, and this sphincter does not open except after the stomach finishes its work, or after about 4 hours or few hours. This sphincter is going to open to allow the food to the outside. By the way, I forgot to tell you that the saliva contains mucus because it lubricates the food when it is swallowed. Whenever the food is passing from one station to another, it must be lubricated, and you are going to find that all or nearly all the juices that are found in the alimentary canal, they have mucus as well. In the stomach, it produces the gastric juice, which is a digestive juice that is formed of, again, because it's a juice, so it's mainly made of water. It contains mucus. It contains, of course, HCl and enzyme pepsin. Pepsin enzyme is a kind of protease that begins the digestion of proteins. So because we have only one enzyme responsible for digestion of proteins in the stomach, so whatever you eat is not affected, only the proteins. But here pepsin does not digest proteins completely. No, it partially digests proteins, exactly like what saliva did. It partially digested starch into maltose, because later on in the intestine, in the ileum, this maltose will change into glucose, because we know that digestion means breaking down of the large food molecules into smaller ones that can be dissolved in water to be carried by the blood. If it is starch, it cannot be carried by the blood because starch does not dissolve in water, but glucose can. So here the pepsin, it does not digest proteins completely. No, it begins again the partial digestion of proteins. But let's go to the next station bar, which is the duodenum or the small intestine. It's not very clear here. Let me get another one. Duodenum. I had a good picture. Where is it? Here it is. Now, if this is the stomach, for example, we have the small intestine, the next station. Small intestine is divided into 3 parts. This part is called duodenum, which is a C-shaped tube about 15 to 20 centimeters long, then about 3 meters or 2 meters of another tube, which is called the jejunum, and then the end of the small intestine, which is called the ileum. In the duodenum and ileum, digestion of food happens, but in the jejunum, no. It is just a pathway between the duodenum and the ileum. So if I zoom this in a bit, you can see here, this is the shade or the shadow of the stomach, and this is the duodenum, C-shaped. But why did I get this picture in particular? Because in the duodenum, there are 2 juices that are going to be poured. The first juice is the bile juice, which is formed by the liver. So the liver forms the bile juice, and this bile juice, it has nothing to do with digestion. It does not contain any enzymes, but it contains certain chemicals that are going to emulsify fats. Now, what's the meaning of to emulsify fats? It means that if there are large fat globules that fall to the duodenum with food, so this bile is going to break them down into smaller globules like this in order to increase the surface area again for the effect of the enzymes. But where do the enzymes come from? They come from the pancreas. This pancreas secretes the pancreatic juice. And this pancreatic juice, again, because it's a juice, it contains water, it contains sodium hydrogen carbonate, and I'm going to tell you why now. It contains enzymes, 2 types of enzymes, and it contains, again, mucus. As I told you before, that all these secretions, they contain mucus. But what about these enzymes? We have lipase enzyme that's going to act on the fats to change these fats into fatty acids and glycerol. And by the way, this is the only place where the fats are digested. The fats are digested in only 1 step, in the duodenum, by the effect of the lipase enzyme. The other enzyme is trypsin. Trypsin is another protease that completes partial digestion of protein again. So pepsin begins the digestion of proteins in the stomach. And this pepsin, it needs a very low pH. That's why HCl was found in the stomach. It provides a low pH for the pepsin to act. While in the duodenum, we need a high pH or alkaline pH, which is provided by this sodium hydrogen carbonate. And of course, lipase It needs the same pH. Now, also, there is another enzyme which is amylase. Again, amylase. يبقى amylase was found in the salivary glands and in the pancreatic juice. But why is amylase found here? Because if you swallowed your food without proper mixing with amylase or without proper chewing, so food is going to fall into the duodenum as starch again. So this amylase is responsible for partially digesting this starch. Also, if there is glycogen, it is returned back to glucose by the action of amylase. Now let's go to the next station, which is the ileum. And as I told you before, that jejunum, it's just a pathway. It has nothing to do with digestion. The ileum, which is the longest part of the small intestine, and it produces the intestinal juice. Again, juice means water, together with mucus for lubrication, together with enzymes. Here in the ileum, complete digestion of everything is going to happen. So, proteins, they came from the duodenum partially digested. So here, proteins must be changed into amino acids. So we have peptidases, which are other types of proteases. Right now we know that proteases, we have three types. We have pepsin in the stomach, we have trypsin in the duodenum, and we have peptidase in the small intestine, in the ileum. Also, we have disaccharides. So we have disaccaridases. Right, dases. Like what? We have maltase that's going to work on maltose and change it into glucose. So here, this maltase is going to complete the digestion of starch, maltose, because starch changed into maltose in the mouth and in the duodenum, into glucose. Of course, there is also sucrase, which changes sucrose into fructose and glucose. There is lactase, which changes the lactose into glucose, and here sucrose into glucose and fructose. And the last one, lactase, will change the lactose into glucose and galactose. Yani disaccharidases that are found in the ileum, they complete, they digest the starch completely, and they digest the disaccharides, sucrase and lactase, sucrose and lactose completely.